Welcome to Red Shikshan Sanstha's online learning program. Good morning students. Today we are going to learn lesson number 16, No Formalities Please, part first. Now today in this lesson we are going to learn how a teacher Mrs. Desai teaches the children to write the formal letter. Let us read and understand the lesson. The students of class 4th greeted their teacher Mrs. Desai before they sat down. It was time for their English lesson. Shall we bring out our Balbharti textbook, teacher? Asked Shruti. Now here in this lesson, we see that Mrs. Desai is an English teacher, and as soon as teacher enters in the class, all students greeted her, and there is a girl called Shruti is asking Mrs. Desai that, shall we bring out our Balbharti textbooks? Not now, said the teacher. We are going to learn letter writing today. Some special types of letters. Come here, Javed and Nisha. Please distribute these notebooks. Now the girl whose name is Shruti and she is asking teacher about bring out the Balbharti textbooks. The teacher said, not now because we are going to learn letter writing today, and she is asking Javed and Nisha to come here and distribute these notebooks. And while they give out the books, continued Mrs. Desai, let me give you some good news. Now teacher is going to give good news to the students, and who is distributing the notebooks? Javed and Nisha. Let us see the next paragraph. The students were all ears now. The teacher announced with a smile, new arrivals in the library and plenty of them. Story books of every kind, informative books with lovely pictures, books of puzzles, jokes. All have been displayed in the library, so you will know which ones to ask for the next time you are in the library. Now here, students were all ears means listening attentively, and their teacher is announcing with a smile that there are new arrivals in the library, means there came the different types of books, every kind of story books, some informative books means the books which gives us more information such as a great leader, freedom fighter, etc., with lovely pictures, books of puzzles and jokes. And the teacher also told them that all these books have been kept in the library for reading. Oh, lovely! I can hardly wait, were some of the eager responses to this piece of news. All were excited except one. Now when the teacher told about these new books, she is waiting for the students' excitement about these new books. What's the use? Complained Felix. We have only one library period in a week, and hardly for half an hour too. Just when the story gets interesting, we have to leave the book and go back to class. Now here in this paragraph, a boy whose name is Felix complained that we have only one period, and that is only for half an hour, means only 30 minutes. And when we read any story and that story gets interesting, but we have to leave the book and go back to the class because of the less time. Now Varsha joined in to say, for 2 weeks I have been waiting to know what happened to the Pied Piper of Hamelin. There was a holiday last Thursday and we missed the library period. Now Varsha is telling, she says for 2 weeks she has been waiting to read the story of Pied Piper. But what happened there? There was a holiday on last Thursday. She missed the library period. Mrs. Desai realized that what her students said was perfectly true. She decided to request the principal to allow a home issue facility for class 4. After all, they were big enough to look after the books they took home. Now teacher Mrs. Desai listened all the problems of her students, and she understood that her students said was perfectly right, and so she decided to request the principal to allow a home issue facility, means to give permission to take books to their home for the class 4th. They can read the book and return it. After all, they were big enough to look after the book. Hey, wait, thought Mrs. Desai. There is a better way to do it. Why not let the students themselves write a letter of request to the principal? After all, that was what she had planned to teach that day, how to write polite formal letter. Now when Mrs. Desai was thinking about asking the principal a home issue facility for class 4th, a beautiful idea came to her mind, and she said, "Wait, why should not the students write the request letter to the principal? And after all, she teaches the students how to write formal letter in polite way. What an opportunity! A good subject for a formal letter. And of course, a real situation would make the learning more effective and interesting." When Mrs. Desai suggested this to her class, they were very excited. Without losing much time, Mrs. Desai began to teach her class how to write a formal letter. Now, when Mrs. Desai told them that she is going to teach them to write a formal letter and the situation would make the learning more effective and interesting, to ask the principal about home issue facility. And when Mrs. Desai suggested to her class, all students became happy and very excited. And in this way, without wasting time, Mrs. Desai started teaching to the class how to write a formal letter. The sender's address and the date should be written in the upper right corner of the page, she taught. Now Mrs. Desai told the students that we have to write sender's address and the date in the upper right corner. The next step is to write the name or post of the receiver near the left margin, then write his or her address below that. Now she told them the next step to write the name or post of the receiver near the left margin and write the address of the receiver below that. And after that, you must write the subject of the letter in short below the receiver's address, she further instructed. After that, Mrs. Desai told the children that they must write subject of the letter in short. Now, what is subject? Subject is the main part of the letter, where you want to convey the receiver, the main part of the letter. That's something new, remarked Sharon. We do not mention a subject in our friendly letters, do we? Of course not, said Mrs. Desai. Now Sharon is asking, do we write subject in friendly letters? And Mrs. Desai said, no, we can't write subject in friendly letters. What do we write next, teacher? Shruti wanted to know. Now Shruti is asking to the teacher, what do we write next? You address the receiver writing dear sir or dear madam. Remember, the rest of the letter also should be written in polite language. Right to the point, Mrs. Desai explained. Now, this is the part of the salutation. If you addressing the male, you can write dear sir, and if you addressing to female, you can write dear madam. And Mrs. Desai told the students that you must remember that remaining all part of the letter should be written in polite language. And should we end it with yours lovingly? Asked Renu. Now Renu is asking to Mrs. Desai, should we end the letter with yours lovingly? Oh no, said teacher. You can write that to your friends or parents or even to me. But when you are writing as a student to the principal, you may write yours faithfully or sincerely. Do not forget to thank the receiver appropriately before you close the letter. Come on, now let's draft this letter together. Now Mrs. Desai is telling the children, you will not write yours lovingly, but you will write yours faithfully or yours sincerely, because you use these words when you are writing to the sender in a formal letter, and lovingly is used in an informal letter. Now all students come together to draft the letter. After quite a few errors, cancellations and changes, Here's the letter class 4th wrote to their principal. Mrs. Desai met the principal soon after class. She told her about the excitement that followed the announcement of new books in the library. They just cannot wait to read all those lovely books. She beamed. The principal was also delighted and praised her. The credit goes to you, Mrs. Desai. You have created and aroused their interest in reading books. It is going to help them a great deal in future. Now here in this paragraph, Mrs. Desai meets the principal after the class is over, and she tells the principal about the excitement of the class, and she announced the new arrivals of books in the library, and she told the principal that they are very eager to read those lovely books, and she beamed means she smiled, and the principal was also delighted. She was also happy and praised the teacher and said that the credit goes to you, Mrs. Desai, because you have created and increased their interest in reading books, and this habit of reading books is going to help them in their future. Yes, madam, said Mrs. Desai, but they find the weekly library period too short a time to read. So, my students are going to appeal to you to allow home issue of books. They have written to you a letter of request. Now, Mrs. Desai is telling the principal, yes, they find the weekly library period very short. The time is very less to finish their reading. And so, she is telling the principal, the students are asking your permission to allow them to take their library books to home to read, and they have written a letter of request. A letter? Why? Asked the principal in surprise. I had to teach the class how to write polite formal letters, and I took this opportunity to make them actually write a formal letter, explained Mrs. Desai. Now Mrs. Desai told the principal, and she was surprised. A letter? Why? So Mrs. Desai explained principal that she had to teach the student to write the formal letter. Excellent, Mrs. Desai, exclaimed the principal, and I shall not dampen their interest in reading. I shall certainly allow them to take books home for reading. Now the principal was also became happy, and she praised Mrs. Desai, and she said, excellent, Mrs. Desai, and I shall not dampen means reduce their interest in reading, and I shall certainly allow them to take books to their home for reading. The next morning, the principal found the letter on her desk. She signed the letter with the remark, permission granted, and sent it to the librarian to encourage the children of class 4th. Further, the principal instructed the librarian to give a written reply to the students, and here's what he wrote. Now here in this paragraph, next morning when the principal came to office, she found the letter on her desk, and on seeing this, the principal signed the letter with remark, permission granted, and she sent the letter to the librarian. Librarian means a person who keeps account of the books in the library. Hey, great news, cried the monitor. Look, we have received a letter from the librarian, and guess what? We can take storybooks home to read. Now the monitor tells the children that here is a great news, and what's the great news? They have received the letter from the librarian that we can take storybooks home to read. Wow! Exclaimed Shruti with bright round eyes. Goodbye, boredom. Welcome, happy hours, shouted Akshay. Now Akshay is shouting, and he said, goodbye, boredom means when we feel boring. And he shouted happily. The letter from the librarian was put on the class notice board for all to read. When Mrs. Desai walked into the classroom, The students of class 4th burst out into many exclamations of thanks. Now the letter was put on the class notice board, and as soon as Mrs. Desai, their English teacher, enters in the class, all students were excited with joy, and they were telling the teacher and expressing their thanks to the teacher. Shall we write a letter of thanks to the librarian? Suggested Manuja. That's an excellent idea, said Mrs. Desai, smiling to herself at this new interest in formal letter writing. Now Manuja asked the teacher, "Can we write a letter of thanks to the librarian?" So teacher said, "It's an excellent idea," and she was happy that the children had their interest not only in reading books but also in writing letter. Now here are some new words from the lesson. Learn these new words and write in your notebook. In this way, today we have learned the lesson No Formalities Please. I hope you have understood the lesson. Thank you.